Joining me on Off the Record today is British writer Ken Follett, who's here in Chennai for the launch of his latest book, Fall of Giants, the first book in his epic century trilogy. Thank you very much for joining us.
A pleasure. Thanks for having me.
You know, there's something very comforting about a book this size, the thought of coming home to it every evening, almost like a date. So I was wondering if we could start with me telling our audience a little bit about the plot, the magnitude and the sweep of the novel.
Please do, but don't give away any secrets.
No, I won't. Ken Follett follows the lives of 5 intertwined families in this book: German, American, Welsh, Russian and British. Yeah, the book starts in 1911 with the coronation of King George V, the same day when 13-year-old Billy Williams starts his first day of work in a coal mine in Wales. The book ends in 1924, but before that you go through World War I, the Russian Revolution, the fall of the antiquated class system, the beginnings of the women's suffrage movement, and you get into the lives of no less than 125 characters, 20 of whom are actual historical figures. Thank you for giving the reader such a wonderful book to delve into. I was wondering if you could tell us whether it was exhausting to write the book.
Well, no. The first time I wrote a long book was The Pillars of the Earth, and I did find that tiring because it was just a question of making up more and more stuff about the same people, and a long book does require that. But I'm kind of used to it now. World Without End was a long book, and Fall of Giants, I'm beginning to get used to this process of, instead of just describing the characters in the middle of their lives, describing them developing from young person or child or even baby to teenager to married person, having children of their own. I'm getting used to that process now, but you're right, when I first did it I found it quite difficult.
You say that you usually, before you send your novel for publication, you show it to about a few experts to check for historical accuracy, and in the case of Fall of Giants you showed it to about 8 people. So do you also have research assistants to help you with the material before you start writing it?
I have one guy who helps me with research, but he doesn't really do the research. He finds things for me. He finds people for me to interview, or old books, or maps, or old film, photographs. But then I have to do the reading or the interviewing or whatever it is. I can't have somebody do that for me because another person wouldn't know quite what I was looking for. I'm looking always for the small detail that sums everything up for the reader. For example, in the coal mine, there are cupboards, lockers marked breathing apparatus, and in an emergency, when the miners open the cupboards, they're empty. Now that's a little detail that came from the research. It tells you everything you need to know about the coal owners. You don't need a page of statistics. You don't need legislation. That little detail. So I'm looking for those little details.
So I was going to say that your attention to detail is really, really remarkable, whether it be the interiors of an aristocrat's home in England, or the dank, dark depths of a coal mine in Wales, or the action on the war zone in Prussia, or the workings of a factory in Russia. You seem to get it bang on. So do you actually travel to these places and make elaborate and precise notes, or how do you do
It's always better to travel to the place. It's always better, and I did go to St. Petersburg. In fact, I've been to the factory where Grigory and Lev work. It's a real factory. In those days it was called the Putilov Works. It was a bit difficult to find out about the lives of working class Russians. It was very easy to find out about the royal family, the princes and the countesses and so on, and their jewels and their palaces and their parties. It was more difficult to find out about working class Russians, but I was able to establish that in that factory they worked 12 hours a day, Monday to Saturday, and that many of the workers actually lived at the factory and slept underneath their machines because there was no housing. And that kind of thing, you know, that's the texture of the everyday lives of those characters, and that sort of thing is very important.
So what drove the conception of the book? Was it the plot, or which of the 125 characters?
What drives it is my notion that the 20th century is the most dramatic and violent century in the history of the human race, and yet is also the century of ideals. We killed one another in the 20th century at a dreadful rate in wars, by bombing, and in pogroms, Nazi Germany and Stalin's Russia. And yet it's the century of democracy. See, at the beginning of the 20th century, very few countries had democracy. By the end, democracy was the norm. It was the century when groups in our societies demanded equality, starting with women. And so you have those high ideals contrasted with terrible slaughter, and that's the kind of irony that attracts a novelist.
You talk about how important it is for an outline. I went to your website, which is a treasure trove, where you talk about how the outline plays a very important role and how for the eye of the needle, the outline played a role in its success as well as taking the narrative in a more measured and slow manner. But in the case of a book like The Pillars of the Earth or Fall of Giants, there's so much material and so many characters. So how do you hold it all in?
Well, you're quite right. The outline is a very important tool in that way. It tells me what happens in every chapter and who these people are. But I also have some other tools. I make a spreadsheet of the characters. Each time I introduce a new named character, I paste the character into the spreadsheet with the age so that I don't in 10 years' time, I don't forget how old the character is supposed to be, because readers notice this, and the description, so that I don't have somebody with blue eyes in chapter 2 and brown eyes in chapter 10. And that helps me keep control. Mainly my aim is to make sure that it's not a challenge for you. It's okay if it's a challenge for me to keep track of all these people, but for you it should be effortless. Mm-hmm. You should know immediately who these people, if I've done my job right, you will know immediately who these people are.
When we come back after a short break, Ken, I'd like you to tell us whether you've ever toyed with the idea of being a historian and how important steamy scenes are in thrillers, but that's after a short break. You're watching Off the Record with best-selling writer Ken Follett.